Hey everyone, I'm James, and this is Covetous Imp Gaming, and this week we're going to talk about my favorite spell, the only spell, Counterspell, as well as 10 other spells that I think that your big bad evil guy can't live without. If you haven't done so already, please do all the things that the internet robots want you to do. Like this video, leave us a comment, hit the subscribe button, and ring the bell so that you're alerted to when we release our future content. And check us out over on Facebook and Patreon. Those links are down below. So the first thing I want to talk about is Counterspell. It can be a little bit of a confusing spell. If you cast a spell at level 3 or lower, and your opponent casts a counterspell at level 3, the spell is countered if there's no other reactions taking place. Where it gets tricky is when a spell gets cast at a higher level than 3, and you're using a lower level counterspell. Anytime that your counterspell meets or beats the spell's level, the spell's automatically countered. If there's a difference, and say I cast a level 5 spell and you use a level 3 counterspell, then you have to roll against a 10 plus the spell's level. So in this case, it would be 15. And for example, if you have a plus 3 modifier to your spellcasting ability, then you would need a 12 or better on die. The next tricky part in the counterspell game is if your counterspell gets counterspelled. And in that case, if I were to cast a spell and you cast a counterspell and I use my reaction to then counter your counterspell, then if there's no other reactions, then your counterspell is counterspelled and my spell goes off as planned. So a new house rule regarding counterspell is if the character knows the spell that's being cast, then they would recognize parts of the verbal components or the spell components or the hand gestures required in casting that spell and be able to say, I know that my opponent is casting Fireball, and I would have to tell them your opponent's casting Fireball, and they have that knowledge to decide whether or not they want to counter that spell. However, if it's a spell that they don't know, then they would just see your opponent is casting a spell, and that's the only information they have to kind of decide whether or not they want to cast Counterspell on that spell, on that mystery spell. So now I want to talk about my 5 favorite out of combat spells and my 5 favorite in combat spells. And each one of these lists has a spell that kind of dips into the other list. So the first spell on the out of combat list is the spell Scrying. Now this spell has a number of alterations that can be made to the DC of the spell based on the caster's knowledge and connection to the target. Those affect the DC of the spell that the target's going to have to make. Now, this spell allows the caster to spend 10 minutes casting the spell, and then gives them 10 minutes to see and hear through the eyes and ears of their target. Now, this is a perfect way to spy on the party and allow the caster to either see through the eyes and ears of one of his lieutenants or generals, or right through the eyes of one of the party members. And this is a great way to learn what the party's doing, what they're capable of, the spells that they use regularly, anything. So you're not really metagaming against your party. Your villain knows what the party is capable of and what they do. So the next spell on our big bad guys list of out of combat fun is non-detection. And if the party has gotten some connection or knowledge of our villain, then casting non-detection will prevent them from scrying on the villain. Our next out of combat spell is non-detection times 10, and that is Mind Blank. That makes you immune to psychic damage, immune to being charmed, immune to being scryed on, immune to I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this. You are a blank slate to anyone trying to pry into your mind. The next spell on the list is Guias, and this is my fail forward spell. Let's say the party gets in over their head in a fight and they lose. They are all unconscious, they are locked in cages, and the big bad guy wakes them up and cast Guias on them and gives them a mission to do and completely alters their path from let's kill this big bad guy to now we have to do some task for the big bad guy. And every day that they choose to not follow the path of whatever mission they're given, the person that has Guias cast on them takes 5d10 psychic damage at the end of the day, or at any time that they say, I'm not going to do this task that was given to me, to a maximum of once per day, but this also goes on for 30 days before the spell breaks. So the last spell on the out of combat list bleeds into the combat list, and that spell is Contingency. This is a spell that has a 10-day duration, which means that the day that you cast it, it lasts for the next 10 days. When you cast the spell, it's a 6th level spell. It's going to use a 6th level spell slot, and you immediately cast a 5th level spell that you leave some stipulation for when this thing happens, this spell goes off. My personal favorite is to use this as like a free legendary resistance. If something happens to me that causes me to magically lose control of my character, I cast a 5th level Dispel Magic. Another thing that you can do is to, if I reach 50% health, I would cast Polymorph on myself and turn me into a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The only problem with that is that's a concentration spell. If you're already concentrating on a spell and the stipulation happens, the contingency goes off, which means you stop concentrating on the first spell and you would start concentrating on the polymorph. The first spell on our in combat list kind of dips into the out of combat list, and that is Simulacrum. Imagine walking into a room and seeing your big bad and using and expending all of your party's resources just to find out that you've merely defeated a clone of the big bad, and have them walk out from the next room slowly giving you a golf clap as the real fight begins. Our next spell comes from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and that spell is Invulnerability. Now, your villain has watched you claw your way through every obstacle they've tried to lay in your path, and they've been building up this monologue now for the better part of a year. And you charging into the room, swinging swords and flinging spells, you're not giving them the time to let that monologue out, so why not take a solid 10 minutes and just be immune to all damage and let them get that monologue out. Just as you're about to let that invulnerability go, take a second and cast feeblemind on that one party member that's holding that important artifact that's going to stop your big bad. Make it so they take a little bit of psychic damage, their intelligence and charisma scores are reduced to 1 for a full 30 days, and they are unable to cast spells or activate any magic items. Alright, so the monologue's over, that party member's feeble-minded, and it's time to do some damage. This one is the perfect 1-2-3 combo that is going to knock out 1 to 2 party members easy. You hit the party with a time stop, you grab a few party members and stick them in a force cage, and then you cast Cloud Kill into that force cage. The Cloud Kill makes the area obscured for as far as vision goes, and that way they cannot cast Disintegrate or teleport out of the force cage, and they're forced to just sit in there and slowly die to poison damage. The last spell on the list comes from the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, and that is Darkstar. This is a 40-foot radius ball of doom. It is dark, it nullifies dark vision, you cannot cast spells while you're inside that require verbal components, it's difficult terrain, and all the while it's dealing 8d10 force damage to you every round on a failed save. Now, imagine being in this while you're in a tower, it's going to slowly eat away at the floor underneath you. So when the spell ends and you're still stuck inside, you're going to fall to the floor below. On top of that, if you're inside this and you die, your body and all your items that you're carrying that are not magic items disintegrate. So I have to say that as a DM, I've kind of grown disgusted with spells like Finger of Death, because casting them as a player at a monster, if your spell kills the monster, you get the zombie right away. Whereas if the monster casts it on a player, the character has to go through their death saves before the monster gets their zombie. Where a lower level spell like Disintegrate, if you reach 0 hit points, you're dead and you have no chance of coming back. So it makes it hard to use spells like Finger of Death when you could just upcast a Disintegrate at 7th level and do way more damage and just outright kill a player with a lower level spell. So that's going to wrap up our spell list. Check us out next week when we're covering the Werewolf Den in Curse of Strahd. I want to give a shout out to our newest patron, the Raven's Nest, our favorite local gaming store. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for all the support, and we'll see you in Barovia next week.